and welcome to Bach News Network News Hour. Today we will be focusing on the year 1864 and some of its most important events and people. One of our top stories tonight includes the re-election of Abraham Lincoln. After a hard-fought and divisive campaign against McClellan, the Republican candidate Lincoln prevailed. This election was vital in finding a leader that could possibly end the war that has consumed the nation. Lincoln's campaign focused on the unification of the nation and its people, while McClellan's campaign addressed the problems our country could end up facing after freeing thousands of slaves. Tonight, we will even have an exclusive interview with Lincoln himself concerning his re-election. In addition, we will hear from William Tecumseh Sherman, speaking of his successful but destructive campaign to Atlanta, one of the most important cities of the South, followed by his march to the sea, all caused by hostilities between the North and South. In other news, in March 1864, Ulysses S. Grant was named Lieutenant General and the commander of the Union Army. In this position, he directed Sherman through his drive through the South. Overall, 1864 was a good year for the North politically and militarily, with strong leaders leading them to victory. But for the South, it was quite the opposite. I now introduce you to our reporter, Emily Marsh, who will continue with our feature interviews for today with Abraham Lincoln and William Tecumseh Sherman.
Thank you, Laura. The two major heroes during the war are Lincoln and Sherman. Because of Sherman's burning of Atlanta, which caused an uproar and which allowed Lincoln to gain more support from the Union, Sherman's march through Georgia and the Carolinas further undermined the Confederacy's ability to continue fighting. Together, their actions will help shape the future of our country. Lincoln has just won the presidential election, and today is here with us to give us the inside scoop. Here's the president now. Let's see if we can catch him in time for an interview. Mr. President, can you come here for a second? Hello, Mr. President. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How are you today?
I'm doing fine.
That's great. I have a few questions for you today. How did it feel to be the first sitting president to have won re-election since Andrew Jackson?
It's a great honor, but times are tough due to the fact we're in a war, which disables me to feel a great pride. I'm more concerned about the status of our nation rather than my personal victory.
During the election, what were your viewpoints and platform?
I mainly focused on amending the Constitution to abolish slavery, enforcement of the Monroe Doctrine, and I strongly encouraged immigration and had many goals of building a transcendental railroad.
What percentage did you win against McClellan on the popular vote?
I received 55% of the popular vote, leaving McLean with only 45%.
In the Electoral College, what states did you win over?
A few of the states I won over were California, Connecticut, Illinois, Indiana, and etc.
How many electoral votes did you receive?
I received 221 votes, while my opponent only received 21.
While following the election, at some point, it seemed as though you were being defeated by McClellan. What is your opinion on that?
It looked as though the Republicans were planning on nominating someone else to run, and not giving me any chance to be re-elected.
During your campaign, at any point did you feel that there was a time in which your re-election was ensured?
During the war, the view and the mood were switching in the North, and the majority military victories were lacking. In Illinois and Missouri, there were many regional uprisings that seemed to help greatly. It expanded the cost of the war, inflation, and continued to have a great resistance to the military draft. This gave me some confidence during the running.
So tell us, how did the voting break down?
Well, the Confederate States obviously did not vote in this election. Representing the National Union Party, I had 400,000 more popular votes than my opponent, George McClain. I am happy to say that 70% of these votes came from the soldiers, who will lead our country to victory.
Were you optimistic going into the re-election?
Not exactly. The Confederates won many battles, such as the Battle of Mansfield, the Crater, and Cold Harbor. The death toll is adding up. My opponent, the Copperheads, promised peace at all costs, which is very tempting.
So what do you think the deciding factors were?
I think a key flaw in my opponent's campaign was at the Democratic National Convention. The compromises reached there were contradictory, which left the voters unsure of McClain's consistency.
This is our 4th year in the war. What are your plans?
I believe that winning the Civil War is important. With their military talents, General Sherman and Grant have proved that the Union victory is inevitable. Some might even argue that this war is a second revolution.
What does your cabinet look like?
Yes. I have a great cabinet. I have appointed Andrew Johnson as my vice president, William Henry Seward as my Secretary of State, the Ohio-born Edwin Stanton as Secretary of War, and William Pitt Fessenden from Maine as Secretary of the Treasury.
This is the first election our nation has had during a war. Care to comment?
We cannot have free government without elections, and if the rebellions could force us to forego or postpone a national election, it might fairly claim to have already conquered and ruined us.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next, we have William Tecumseh Sherman, a man of strength, pride, and priority. The middle name of Tecumseh reflects on his warrior-like personality. Here's the warrior himself. Hello, General Sherman. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. A little tired, but I think that's to be expected after a 300-mile march.
All right, I have a few questions for you. Tell us more about your march. How did it start?
Well, I guess it started with the capture of Atlanta on September 1st. I stayed there until I was able to get Grant and Lincoln to approve my march to Savannah. Once I got their approval and all the preparations were made, I ordered that Atlanta be burned down, and we left to Savannah.
What was the march like?
Well, I cut my troops off from all the supplies, so we had to live off the land. We took food and supplies from the towns we went through, and we also split up into 3 different groups in order to confuse the Confederates about where our final destination was.
I heard this term scorched earth being used. Can you explain how it relates to your march?
I used the idea of scorched earth throughout the march. I had my men destroy bridges, telegraph lines, and railroads, along with any food and supplies that we did not need.
What was your goal in doing this?
Well, Grant believed that we could end the Civil War if we were able to break the will and the ability of the Confederates to continue fighting. Without railroads, bridges, and telegraph lines, communication in the South would be much harder, and we were able to greatly reduce the amount of supplies available to the Confederates. I estimate that my march is responsible for $100 million in damage.
So what happened once you got to Savannah?
When we got to Savannah, there were some Confederate troops waiting for us, but they were no match for me and my 60,000 men. We captured Savannah, which I then offered to Lincoln as a Christmas present. A couple months later, I continued up north to Columbia.
Thank you, General Sherman. Now back to Laura in the studio.